Good morning. I'm Terry Horan, and I have the honor of turning the tables today on Libby Allison. We are taping our 100th podcast here this morning, and Libby has been involved in all 100 of these podcasts over the last 2 years. This podcast has been well received across the country, and so today we have the opportunity to ask Libby about some of the milestones she's seen in these 100 podcasts. So Libby, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. How do you like being on the other side of the table here?
It's kind of scary.
Yeah.
People tell me when they come to be a guest on the podcast that they're scared, and I'm always like, I don't understand why. It's a fun thing to do, but
right.
I kind of get it a little bit.
Well, we'll make it fun. How's that?
Good.
So, why did we decide to start the podcast in the beginning?
So, the podcast was started because from a benefits perspective, we noticed that there was a gap in knowledge. So there's a lot to know, there's a lot to learn, and we just wanted to provide a new way for people to learn about their benefits. It's evolved since then into adding some financial wellness topics and physical and mental wellness topics also, because we think there's a gap in knowledge there also. So we wanted to provide a new way for people to learn and grow.
And what do you like about the podcast format?
I think that we were just talking a little bit about how great podcasts are, because you don't have to sit down, you don't have to open a book, you can literally move on with your life. You can be taking a walk, you can be working on something, and you can be listening to a podcast and learning. So it can be incorporated into your daily life.
Right. Well, so you must have some favorite memories since you began. Hopefully they're not all the bloopers that had to occur in the editing, but perhaps you can share a couple of your favorite memories.
Yeah, so I will say that some of my favorite memories are the bloopers. When we first started, I'll be honest, we didn't really know what we were doing. Podcasts were new to us, so we had to kind of weave our way through the process, and there were a lot of laughs. There were a lot of times when we would stumble over our words a lot, and we'd end up crying on the floor laughing because it was hilarious.
Right.
But I also think some favorite memories have come from some of the people that I've gotten to work with also at HORAN. So at HORAN, there's different departments. People do different things around here, and sometimes we're so busy and you get so caught up in what you're doing that you forget that there's all these other teams and all these other people at HORAN that can teach you so much. And so I've learned so much from the financial wellness podcasts that we've done, some of the mental and physical wellness podcasts that we've done, and I've gotten to work with a lot of really great people over my time as we've been doing the podcast.
Yeah. Well, I think you say that very well. It's a very diverse, bright group of people, and you can learn a lot.
Yeah.
But you do have to keep your ears open and walk around a little bit, right?
Yeah, you do.
So, Libby, do you think you've got a favorite podcast?
That's a really hard question. I don't know if I could pick one, but I do think in one of our early episodes, we did one that was called Well, Snow Much for That. And we had Amy Smith on the podcast. It was our first episode that I think brought everything together of how we wanted the podcast to be perceived. So we wanted it to be real stories from real people talking about things that affect people in their daily lives. And Amy brought that in for us. So to kind of recap the episode, she at one point hurt her knee on a skiing accident, and she went through all of the right steps from a good consumer health insurance perspective, and it kind of brought a whole picture of kind of the right way to handle something. Instead of just going straight to the emergency room, or instead of just assuming the worst, she took the right steps, she was patient, she did her research, and I think that episode it was fun to record, I remember, and we got so much content out of it, and there was so much to learn from that one episode.
That's fascinating. So you talked about some of your learnings, but what have you learned as being a host of the podcast?
I have learned so much. I think there's probably two things that I would say The first one, and I know this, but it's become really, really apparent as we're doing the podcast, and it's actually perfect because our fundamental of the week is collaborate.
Yeah.
I have learned that in order to bring a big project, so something like the podcast, across the finish line, you have to collaborate to get there. So there are so many people that work on the podcast, bring their knowledge, work behind the scenes to get this done, and it honestly would not be possible without every single person's input and expertise. The other thing I think that I've learned from the podcast, I mean, I can't even put into words the knowledge that I've gained just from hosting some of these podcasts. So the guests that we've brought in, the people at HORAN that have come on the podcast to talk about financial and physical and mental wellness, those are things that I don't see in my everyday job at work. So bringing those people in has been a great learning experience for me, and it's one of the things that I love most about the podcast also, because I think the podcast creates a space for people to continue to learn. So as we think about like the current situation that we're all in with COVID and everything else that's going on, there are opportunities for us to improve upon how we're all living. So our physical, our financial, our mental wellness, we're all or should be kind of taking a back seat and reevaluating where we're at with that, especially during this time. And the podcast is a great place to start because we're covering all of the basics that you need to know.
Well said. That's well said. So the future, the next 100, think they'll take 2 years to pull off? What do you look for as the future of your podcasts? My hopes for the future of the podcast, I guess, to say it simply at first, is just that I hope that the future is bright. And I know that it is, but I hope to continue to learn. I hope to continue to bring in new people, new topics to talk about. And I hope that more people start to listen. So we've gotten a really good following now, but like I said, this podcast covers the basics of so many things. I've personally learned so much. So I hope that more people hear about this podcast and start to actively listen to this podcast, because I think you can learn so much. So what you're telling us is this fundamental of the week, collaboration, is going to be important to collaborate and figure out how to spread the footprint of the current podcast.
Yes.
Good for you.
Exactly.
Good for you. Any other thoughts before we close?
I don't think, nothing like huge. I just think like I need to take this time to say thank you to everyone who's been a part of this process from start to finish. There have been so many great guests who have spent their time and energy thinking about what they're going to say and making sure that their message is meaningful. And then there's been so many people inside of HORAN who have, from start to finish, brought some of these great topics to us and made them come to life on the podcast. So thank you to everyone who's been involved. It's been a pleasure working with every single one of you, and I'm so excited for the future.
Well, just let me say that on behalf of HORAN, we want to thank you for taking the lead on these, and of course thank our marketing team who's standing behind us and makes these things go.
Yes.
But thanks so much for bringing this idea to HORAN and then spreading the word. And I hope it goes far and wide. Thanks, Libby.
Thanks, Terry.